In the dim light of a dying star, an archaeological team unearths something that should have remained buried. The ancient temple on Kaldor holds secrets that could change the fate of their civilization or destroy it. As shadow guardians awaken from centuries of slumber, the team faces an impossible choice: destroy the powerful key artifact or use its dangerous potential to save their people. But beware, some doors were never meant to be opened. Subscribe now to uncover the full story of the key and its terrible power. The Crimson Sands of Kaldor whispered secrets to those who dared listen. Mark Raven adjusted his environmental suit as the twin suns cast long shadows across the excavation site. 20 years of chasing ancient civilizations had led him here, to this forsaken planet at the edge of known space. His boots crunched against the brittle surface as he approached the newly uncovered entrance, a perfect archway carved from obsidian-like material that seemed to drink in the light. Alice Holt's voice crackled through his comms unit. "Mark, you need to see this." Her excitement was palpable even through the static. The young biologist had been analyzing soil samples when she discovered traces of organic material far too complex to be natural formations. Inside the makeshift research tent, holographic displays danced with her findings, DNA sequences that defied conventional understanding, suggesting intelligent design rather than random evolution. Their local guide, Zorn, stood silently at the entrance, his bioluminescent markings pulsing softly in the gathering dusk. His species had warned them about this place for generations, speaking of cursed grounds where time bent and reality fractured. Yet here they were, drawn by the promise of discovery like moths to a flame. The air seemed heavier near the temple entrance, charged with an energy that made Mark's skin prickle beneath his suit. As they descended the first steps into darkness, ancient mechanisms stirred to life. Runes along the walls began to glow with an ethereal light, casting eerie patterns that danced across their faces. The temperature dropped noticeably, and a low hum filled the corridor, resonating deep within their chests. Mark's hand instinctively went to his sidearm, though he knew conventional weapons would be useless against whatever ancient protections lay ahead. The corridor opened into a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow despite the awakened runes. At the center stood a pedestal, and upon it rested the key, a crystalline structure that pulsed with an inner light, shifting through colors that seemed to exist just beyond human perception. Alice approached cautiously, her scanner already overloaded with data streams. This shouldn't be possible," she whispered, her voice trembling with equal parts fear and wonder. "The energy signature is off the charts, but it's not just power, it's alive." Zorn stepped forward, his luminous patterns darkening in warning. "Ancestors forbid," he murmured in his native tongue before switching to common. "This place was sealed for reason. My people tell stories of those who came before, beings who walked between worlds until—" His words trailed off as the air grew heavier, charged with anticipation. Mark circled the pedestal, noting intricate carvings that told a story of creation and destruction. Figures moved across the walls in bas-relief, depicting a race of beings harnessing unimaginable power, opening portals to other dimensions. But the final panels showed chaos, cities crumbling, creatures of shadow devouring everything in their path. He reached out, fingertips hovering millimeters above the key's surface. "If we could understand how it works." Zorn's sharp command echoed through the chamber. "Do not touch. Seals are breaking. They will come." As if on cue, the light from the runes flickered, and a cold wind swept through the chamber, carrying with it whispers and languages none of them recognized. Shadows detached from the walls, coalescing into humanoid forms that seemed to absorb what little light remained. The first shadow guardian emerged fully formed, its features indistinct yet horrifyingly familiar, as if it wore the face of every nightmare one had ever experienced. It moved with unnatural grace, gliding toward them without sound. Mark raised his weapon instinctively, but Zorn stayed his hand. "Metal cannot harm them. Only knowledge can protect us." The alien's markings flared brightly, creating a barrier of light that forced the entity to retreat several paces. Alice scrambled to record everything, her scientific curiosity overcoming fear. They're not physical beings, she observed, analyzing the readings. More like concentrated packets of dark matter held together by emotions? Memories? Her eyes widened as realization dawned. That's why they're attacking. We disturbed their prison, their resting place. The chamber continued to transform around them, additional runes illuminating to reveal more of the ancient civilization's history. Mark traced his fingers over new symbols, feeling a strange resonance. These aren't just records, he muttered. They're instructions. Safety protocols. A particular sequence caught his attention, a combination of sigils that seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat. There's a way to communicate with them, to establish a truce. But at what cost? Zorn interjected. Each attempt to control the key has ended in disaster. Your kind is not ready for such power. The Shadow Guardians multiplied, pressing against the barrier of light. Their collective presence created a pressure that made thinking clearly difficult, as if they were siphoning away hope itself. We don't have a choice, Mark argued, studying the illuminated instructions. If we can master the key, we might prevent the coming invasion our sensors detected on the journey here. He referenced the fleet of unknown origin their ship had picked up weeks ago, moving inexorably toward populated sectors. This technology could be our only defense. His voice carried conviction, but his eyes betrayed doubt. Alice processed the new information, her mind racing through possibilities. Assuming we survive long enough to learn how to use it, she countered. Every second we spend here, more of them manifest. And look, she pointed to subtle changes in the key's crystalline structure. It's adapting to our presence, growing stronger. What if activating it makes things worse? Zorn moved closer to the artifact, his bioluminescence interacting strangely with its light. My people speak of a balance between preservation and progress. The key represents both ultimate knowledge and ultimate destruction. Perhaps the question isn't whether we can use it, but whether we should. His gaze shifted between his companions. Your kind has a saying, power corrupts. Do you wish to test this truth? The Shadow Guardians pressed harder against their barrier, their forms becoming more defined. Faces appeared within the darkness, countless expressions of anguish and rage. Mark felt a chill run down his spine as he recognized some of the features from old Earth mythology. These weren't just random manifestations, they were echoes of every failed experiment, every civilization that had sought to wield power beyond their understanding. The situation escalated as the barrier began to falter. Zorn's markings dimmed dangerously, the effort of maintaining the protective field draining his strength. We must make a decision, he gasped, sweat beading on his scaled forehead. Destroy the key while we still can, or attempt activation and risk unleashing forces beyond comprehension. His words hung heavy in the charged air. Mark studied the artifact intently, noticing previously hidden inscriptions that only became visible under certain angles of light. There's another option, he said slowly. A fail-safe mechanism. If we can decipher these final symbols. His voice trailed off as a particularly aggressive shadow guardian lunged at the barrier, causing it to flicker dangerously. Alice joined him at the pedestal, her hands trembling as she recorded the new findings. The activation sequence is tied to emotional resonance, she explained, like a biometric lock requiring specific neural patterns. That's why unauthorized attempts result in immediate retaliation. Her scanner picked up increased activity within the key's matrix. It's learning from our presence, adapting its defenses. The chamber seemed to grow darker despite the glowing runes, the very air thickening with anticipation. Mark felt the weight of leadership pressing down on him. Destroying the key would mean losing potentially world-saving technology, but attempting activation could unleash catastrophic consequences. He glanced at Zorn, whose people had guarded this secret for millennia, then at Alice, representing the scientific community's insatiable curiosity. Time slowed as they stood at the precipice of decision. The Shadow Guardians had multiplied exponentially, their collective presence creating a deafening silence that somehow overwhelmed all other sounds. Mark's comms unit crackled with static, then went dead completely, the first sign of the key's influence extending beyond the immediate chamber. If we destroy it, he began, weighing each word carefully, we lose any chance of understanding the technology behind dimensional travel. But if we activate it incorrectly, Alice interrupted, her voice steadier now, we might trigger exactly what happened to the civilization that created it. She gestured to the wall carvings showing the downfall of the previous users. Look at their end, entire worlds consumed by these entities. Is that the legacy we want to leave behind? Zorn collapsed to one knee, his barrier weakening further. There is another way, he rasped. My ancestors spoke of a ritual, a method to seal the key permanently without destroying it. But it requires. His voice broke as he struggled to maintain the protective field. It requires sacrifice. One must become the new guardian, merging consciousness with the key to maintain balance. The revelation hung in the air like a death sentence. Mark watched Alice's expression change from determination to horror as she processed the implications. The key pulsed brighter, sensing their hesitation, its crystalline structure shifting in response to their emotional turmoil. The Shadow Guardians pressed closer, their forms becoming almost solid, individual faces emerging from the darkness, each representing a failed attempt to control the artifact throughout history. The ritual, Zorn continued through gritted teeth, requires complete neural synchronization with the key's matrix. The volunteer would essentially become part of its operating system, existing simultaneously in all dimensions it connects. His bioluminescent patterns flickered erratically as he fought to maintain consciousness. But there's no guarantee of maintaining individuality. You could become just another Shadow Guardian. Mark examined the new symbols revealed by the key's increased activity. Wait, there's more here. Additional safeguards. His trained eye caught subtle variations in the glyph's arrangement. It's not just a prison or a weapon. This is a library of sorts, containing the combined knowledge of every civilization that successfully interacted with it. He ran his fingers lightly over the pedestal, feeling minute vibrations that suggested an intelligence responding to his touch. Alice monitored their vital signs, noting alarming fluctuations. Our brainwave patterns are synchronizing involuntarily, she reported. Whatever we decide, we need to do it soon. The longer we stay connected to the key's field, the greater the risk of permanent neural damage. Her scanner displayed disturbing data. Their consciousnesses were beginning to bleed into each other's, memories and thoughts mixing in unpredictable ways. The Shadow Guardians reacted violently to their proximity to understanding, slamming against the weakening barrier with renewed ferocity. Through the chaos, Mark noticed something peculiar. Certain entities lingered longer than others, their forms less hostile, almost curious. Some of these guardians aren't enemies, he realized. They're previous guardians trying to warn us about something, perhaps about the true nature of the threat approaching our sector. Zorn's barrier shattered with a sound like breaking glass, sending shockwaves through the chamber. The Shadow Guardians surged forward, but instead of attacking, they formed a protective circle around the team. They're shielding us, Alice breathed, watching as the entities positioned themselves between the group and the key. From what? Her question was answered moments later, when the chamber shook violently and a new presence manifested, a massive, amorphous shape that seemed to occupy multiple dimensions simultaneously. This is what destroyed them, Zorn wheezed, struggling to his feet. Not the key, but what they tried to keep out using it. The creature pulsed with malevolent energy, its form constantly shifting between comprehensible shapes and incomprehensible geometries. Mark understood now why the previous civilization had created the key, not as a weapon, but as a sophisticated early warning system and last line of defense against this cosmic horror. The key responded to the threat, its crystalline structure unfolding into complex patterns that bathed the chamber in multicolored light. Ancient machinery hidden in the walls activated, revealing that the entire temple was a containment facility designed to hold both the key and its purpose. We've got it wrong, Mark realized. The key wasn't meant to open portals for exploration. It was meant to seal them permanently. The monstrous entity pressed against the dimensional barriers, its attempts to breach reality, growing more desperate. Through the key's activated interface, Mark perceived fragments of its origin, a being from beyond normal space-time that fed on entire civilizations, consuming their potential like a parasite. The Shadow Guardians, once protectors of their respective worlds, had become trapped between dimensions after failing to contain similar threats in their own times. Alice worked feverishly to interpret the flood of data streaming from the key. The previous civilization didn't fail because they misused the artifact, she deduced. They sacrificed everything to buy time for others to prepare. Her hands trembled as she processed the implications. The approaching fleet we detected isn't an invasion force. It's refugees, survivors fleeing this thing's advance across their sector. Zorn's markings pulsed erratically as he channeled his remaining strength into reinforcing the temple's ancient systems. My people's warnings were incomplete, he admitted. We knew of the danger, but misunderstood its scale. The key isn't just a defensive measure. It's a beacon, calling to compatible minds across dimensions to join the fight against this entity. The Shadow Guardians seemed to acknowledge his words, their forms becoming more defined, less threatening. The chamber's temperature plummeted as the entity redoubled its efforts to break through. Mark felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders, not just for his team, but for every sentient being in their sector of space. The key presented options, each more daunting than the last. Seal the breach permanently, temporarily contain the threat while warning others, or attempt to destroy the entity outright using the key's full power. We need to warn the refugee fleet, Mark declared, his decision crystallizing. Activate the key's communication array. Alice immediately set to work decoding the relevant protocols while Zorn coordinated with the Shadow Guardians to strengthen the containment field. The key responded by projecting holographic displays detailing the approaching vessels, thousands of ships carrying millions of beings from dozens of species, all fleeing the entity's wake of destruction. The Shadow Guardians rearranged themselves, forming complex patterns that resonated with the temple's architecture. Ancient systems long dormant sprang to life, their purpose now clear, to create a dimensional anchor point that could stabilize reality against the entity's incursions. They're helping us, Zorn observed, his voice filled with awe. After all this time, they still remember their duty. Through the key's interface, Mark established contact with the lead vessel of the refugee fleet. Their transmission carried images of devastated worlds, populations reduced to mere fractions of their former numbers. You must turn back, he warned them. Find another route. This location is compromised. But the response was grim. Their course was set, their resources nearly depleted. Without assistance, they would arrive directly in the entity's path. Alice completed the activation sequence for the temple's long-range warning systems. I can broadcast a signal, she announced. But it'll drain what's left of the key's power reserves. We might not get another chance to use it afterward. The Shadow Guardians seemed to agree with this assessment, their forms flickering with urgency. The entity responded by manifesting partial aspects of itself within the chamber, testing their resolve. The decision made itself as the first tendril of the entity breached the dimensional barrier, lashing out with destructive force. Activate the warning system, Mark commanded, gripping the pedestal as the chamber shook violently. We'll use the key's remaining power to create a safe passage for the refugees. Zorn chanted in his native tongue, his bioluminescent patterns weaving through the air to reinforce the temple's systems. Alice initiated the sequence, her fingers flying across holographic controls. The key pulsed brilliantly, its crystalline structure unfolding into a complex web of light that permeated the chamber. Through this network, they transmitted precise coordinates and navigational data to the approaching fleet, marking a narrow corridor through which they could pass safely. The Shadow Guardians aligned themselves with the energy flow, their forms stabilizing as they contributed their collective knowledge to the effort. The entity responded with fury, its manifestation growing more substantial as it sensed its prey escaping. The temple's ancient machinery strained under the assault, metal groaning and stone cracking under impossible pressures. Mark felt the weight of countless lives depending on their success, not just the refugees, but every world that lay along the entity's projected path. The key offered one final option, a risky maneuver that could seal the breach permanently, but at great cost. "We can collapse the dimensional anchor," Mark announced, reading the key's final suggestion. "Create a singularity that will trap the entity between dimensions." Zorn's eyes widened in understanding. "But someone must remain to maintain the field until the process completes." The gravity of the situation settled over them as the entity's presence grew overwhelming. The Shadow Guardians, sensing the plan, began arranging themselves in a protective formation around the chosen exit point. Alice worked quickly to modify the temple systems, rerouting power from non-essential functions to create the necessary energy spike. "I can automate most of the sequence," she said, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "But the final calibration must be done manually, and timing is critical." The key pulsed in agreement, displaying countdown sequences in multiple temporal references. The entity launched a desperate assault, its partial manifestations becoming more numerous and aggressive. The temple's structural integrity alarms blared as sections of the ceiling collapsed. Mark turned to Zorn. "Your people have protected this secret for generations. It's fitting that one of you sees it through to the end." The alien nodded solemnly, his markings glowing with renewed intensity. "I will stay. My consciousness will merge with the key's matrix to maintain stability during the collapse." As Zorn approached the pedestal, the Shadow Guardians formed a protective circle around him, their forms merging with the temple's energy field. "Quickly," he urged, his voice carrying an otherworldly resonance. "Initiate the sequence before the entity breaks through completely." Alice activated the automated systems while Mark prepared the manual override controls. The key's crystalline structure began transforming, its facets aligning with precise astronomical positions. The entity manifested fully within the chamber, its bulk distorting reality itself. Time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously as the creature attempted to consume everything in its path. Zorn placed his hands on the pedestal, his body becoming translucent as his consciousness integrated with the key's matrix. "Go now," he commanded, his voice echoing through multiple dimensions. "The Guardians will ensure your escape." Mark hesitated, torn between duty and friendship, but Alice pulled him toward the designated exit. The Shadow Guardians created a tunnel of light through the chaos, guiding them toward safety. Behind them, the temple began imploding, its ancient systems channeling all remaining energy into the collapsing dimensional anchor. Zorn's final transmission reached them as they emerged into the planet's harsh sunlight. "Remember the balance. Knowledge must always serve protection." The ground shook violently as the temple collapsed into itself, creating a temporary black hole that swallowed the entity's manifestation. Mark and Alice watched from a safe distance as the phenomenon stabilized, leaving behind a perfectly spherical void in reality, a permanent seal against further incursions. The refugee fleet, guided by their transmitted coordinates, passed safely through the designated corridor, their vessels registering the dimensional disturbance, but avoiding its effects. Data streamed from the sealed area, confirming the successful containment. The Shadow Guardians, their duty fulfilled, dissolved into the surrounding dimension, leaving behind only echoes of their presence. Mark felt a profound sense of loss, not just for Zorn, but for the ancient civilization whose final gift had saved countless lives. The key's knowledge remained partially accessible through the residual energy field, offering future generations a chance to learn from past mistakes. Alice recorded everything, ensuring the lessons of Calder would not be forgotten. "We need to warn others," she said, her voice heavy with responsibility. "To prepare better containment measures, develop technologies based on what we've learned." Mark nodded, already planning their next steps. The galaxy had received a reprieve, but the entity's existence proved that threats beyond comprehension lurked in the dark spaces between stars. Weeks later, as their ship entered civilized space, Mark finalized their report. The refugee fleet had successfully resettled, carrying with them the story of Calder and the sacrifice made there. Scientific communities across multiple worlds analyzed their data, developing new theories about dimensional physics and consciousness-based technology. The Shadow Guardians' final contribution had sparked a renaissance in multidimensional studies, leading to breakthroughs in protective technologies. Yet Mark couldn't shake the feeling that their victory was merely temporary. The entity, though contained, still existed. Somewhere, in the vastness of space, other keys waited to be discovered, other temples held their secrets. Zorn's final words echoed in his mind. Knowledge must always serve protection. The galaxy had gained valuable wisdom, but with it came the understanding that some doors, once opened, could never be completely closed. As they approached their home system, Mark made a decision. The lessons of Calder needed to be shared, not just through official channels but with anyone willing to listen. Their experience had shown that true protection came from collective awareness and understanding. The story of the Key, the Shadow Guardians, and the entity beyond would become a cautionary tale for generations to come, a reminder that sometimes the greatest power lies in knowing when to walk away from temptation. Remember to subscribe for more thrilling adventures across the stars, where ancient mysteries meet modern courage and the line between protector and destroyer remains perilously thin.